and I also want to thank you for taking the time out of your schedules to be here, but I also want to take a second and just thank Ted. His support of this work and investing in Virginia and helping us to think through how we can continue to innovate is so essential. When we launched this work last year, part of what we talked about was how the Virginia Department of Education is a 25-story building, and we were viewed as the Tower of No, and we wanted to become the Tower of Yes, and to see so many of you take on that challenge and really take innovation to another level is so impressive. I mean, part of the logic model, if you will, is that innovation doesn't happen at the state level. Innovation happens every day in classrooms with the folks that are closest to our students. And so part of what we're trying to do at the state is just set the conditions so that you can continue to innovate and create those great experiences for every student. I often get asked why we did this Virginia's for Learners Innovation Network, and the answer is ultimately for me, and I think everybody probably has a little different answer. But for me, when I looked around our state, I saw that many of our students were doing really well, but many of our students are still struggling. And we've tried teaching to the test, and it didn't work, right? The kids that were struggling 2 decades ago, or the schools that had kids that were struggling 2 decades ago, are generally the same schools now. So we're gonna have to do something fundamentally different. And I don't believe that test scores should be used to rate teachers, and I don't believe that test scores should be used to rate students and sort students into programs. But I do believe that they can have a narrow purpose to give us a little bit of an inkling of what needs to happen in our schools. And I think that part of what we've missed over the past 2 decades is we've used assessment for all these other purposes that it was never intended for. And truthfully, our teachers already knew what we're trying to collect at the state. And so I think we have to get back to making sure that our teachers are looking at each student individually, building rich and deeply engaging experiences for them, and lifting them up because you've probably heard that Virginia was named the #1 state in the nation for business. Inside that ranking, we were also #1 in the nation in education. And the way that we're going to continue to stay #1 is not by continuing to drill and kill our students with tests and make sure that our best students are better. But the way that we're going to continue to be #1 is to solve some of these social challenges, the race issues we see in our schools, the poverty issues we see in our schools, the equity issues that we see in our schools, to make sure that for Virginia to be #1, we have to be the state that shows that every child can have a great educational experience no matter what their background is. And the way that we're going to do that is with this deeper learning, with this more engaging content, because the other way didn't work.
I think one of the points I want to underscore here is that if at the end of this process, if the only thing that's changed is the way the set of people in this room go about things, we will have failed. I think our whole goal here is to, as James is doing and what the state is doing, what brings me back here time and again, it makes me so excited, is it's not somebody telling people what they have to do. It's putting in place the conditions that encourage them to do what they know makes sense. And I think if you could take that same mindset back to your schools and districts and say, how do we put in place the conditions that empower people to do their very best work through this process of school? And people include students, include classroom teachers, include all the support staff. But if we can put in place the conditions that unleash people to do their very best work, that is what will bring the magic to learning. The second point I'd make is, Virginia has its portrait of a graduate with the 5 C's, and I think that's a really great contribution. And people will sometimes ask me, well, if you had to make a list of what characteristics you think are really important for a young adult leaving school to have, the thing I often cite is not on most people's portrait of a graduate list. And what I say is, in many ways, I think one of the most important things a young adult can be comfortable with coming out of school is being able to embrace, wade into ambiguity. Because careers are going to come and go. Jobs are going to, I mean, you know, my vintage, many of the people, I've got my high school, this is dating me, I'm the oldest person in the room, but my 50th high school reunion is is next fall. And many people out of my high school class had the same job with the same company for 50 years. That is not going to happen for any of our kids. Things are going to change at warp speed, and a lot of adults, you know, who go through school trusting that they're going to be in a great situation, are going to find out that they bet wrong. I mean, this is a particularly terrible time for somebody to spend 10 years of undergraduate, graduate, and residency to be a radiologist, because artificial intelligence is already better than the world's best radiologist. And so, if you start to think about that world, these kids need to be able to say, okay, I don't know exactly how this will work out, but that's not a negative, that's a positive. And I think that's the same sort of mindset that's important to have in this room across your schools, because a lot of the things you're doing, and I'm tracking as much as I can, and I'm very excited about what you're doing, but I think on almost all of these things, this whole process with this group, it'd be easy to say, well, we're not sure exactly how it will work out. And my reaction to that is good. You know, because we're going to figure out things as we go. And if we get good at figuring out things as we go, that behavior, that perspective, that set of priorities will ripple down to our students. And what breaks my heart, okay, what breaks my heart is when I talk to a lot of college seniors, particularly college seniors who've done well in the school process, and I ask them, so what are you going to do next? You know what they're going to do next? They're going to go in and sign up for 12 interviews in the career services office. And they'll take whatever job they get. And if they get 2 or 3 jobs, they'll take whatever pays the most or is in the best location. And I'll say to them, have you thought about creating your own path going forward? And they'll say, I can do that? And I say, not only can you do that, you're going to have to, whatever, even if you get a job through career services, that job is going to be gone in 3 to 5 years. You've got to be able to constantly create a new path going forward. And so I think as we embrace that, as we make that part and parcel of what's going on in our schools, we're actually supporting that kind of perspective, you know, willing acceptance of, okay, it's ambiguous. I don't know exactly how it will work out. That's good, because I think I'm really good at figuring out things on the fly. And so as you think about a more innovative school experience, it's not that we're going from A to B, and in 6 months, 12 months, we'll be at B, and then we can say we're done. It's an evolving, continuous process. And that's actually good. And some of the things you're doing, I know, and some of the things you'll continue to do won't work out as you hope. And I say, terrific. You know, bring your students in and say, this didn't go quite as well as we thought. How can we make it better? Because that whole perspective that says, how can we make this better? You know, it's not quite what we expected. It was interesting. There are things that work that we can build on. How can we make that better? And I think that's exactly what kids who are prepared properly for a world where jobs come and go, those are the kids that are going to just land on their feet and do really well. And so I think that's why the perspective, the core principles that are shared here in this room are so important.
You know, I often get asked, what are we doing at the state level to, you know, change the regulations or change the laws to allow for this type of innovation? And there are some things that maybe I'll share in a second. We're getting ready to take a really deep look at teacher evaluation, for instance, right? Because we can't keep talking about this focus on deeper learning and have 40% of the evaluation still be based on test scores, right?
What did you say? I'm sorry.
But I won't say too much more on that, but I'll just say, look at our next board agenda, and you'll learn more about it. But I'll give you one little nugget here. That was created at a time post-recession due to the state fiscal stabilization fund. We don't get those funds anymore. And so the mandate from outside of Virginia is no longer there. So we have the opportunity as a state to have a deep conversation around where we want to go with teacher evaluation next. And ultimately, I think part of what you'll see in our discussion over the next couple of weeks with the board is, should the school divisions be thinking about what those look like? while we take a much deeper look at what we really should be looking at. I think that, and I don't mean to get too far down a rabbit hole on teacher evaluation, but what we really should be focusing on are the things we can actually observe, which is teacher and student interactions, right? And shouldn't that be the key to the way that we think about evaluating our teachers? Because at the end of the day, if teachers have great relationships with students, if they give students great feedback, if they produce great instructional experiences for students, the outcomes will follow, right? And ultimately, the assessments are probably the big thing that we can't get rid of, that we can totally change how they look, right? That's federal government requirement, and they just did ESSA, so that's probably not going anywhere for another decade, to be honest. But that means third grade reading and math, a science test at each grade band, and an English and math test at the high school. But we really can innovate around that and inside those assessments. But when school divisions ask me what we're doing to innovate, the truth of the matter is, and Tina Mengelmott from our team, who's our interim assistant superintendent, we talk about this all the time with school divisions. We sit down and, as an example, the school divisions of innovation regulations are about to be finalized. So I'm hoping that the 26 of you, plus the 26 of the next cohort, start thinking about that. Now, to be honest, the school divisions of innovation regulations don't allow us to waive anything in the code, and they don't allow us to waive anything in the assessment system. Well, frankly, those are federal requirements. We expected that. But when we looked at every other condition that we wanted to create for school divisions, the truth of the matter is we already have the flexibility to give you a lot of those opportunities. You just have to ask. And so one of the challenges that I'll put on the table, and I met with a superintendent recently that said that the day that those new regulations are in place, we're going to apply to be a school division of innovation. So can I sit down with your team and find out what's allowed to be waived? And so we did some of that, and part of what I'll say to you is, as you go through this and you're looking for an opportunity to innovate, ask us whether you think we're going to say no or not, right? And this is part of what I think turning into the Tower of Yes is. That if the Code of Virginia doesn't allow me to say that you can do something, then certainly I'll have to issue something that says no. But what that will allow us to do is to go back to the General Assembly or to the board or whoever's responsible and say, look, school divisions are ready to innovate and we have a barrier, and folks have asked and we've had to say no. Can we open that up? But if no one's ever asking, no one's ever trying to innovate or push the boundaries of where we can go, then I don't have what I need to show them that what's possible out in the field. And so that's a challenge that I want to put on the table. When the School Division of Innovation regulations come out, we may not be able to do every regulatory waiver. We may not be able to waive every section of the code. But what I will tell you is everything that I say no to will open up a conversation with our General Assembly members around whether some of that should change. And so I want to put that challenge on the table as well. Since last year, we launched Virginia's for Learners, since most of you became part of that cohort. Virginia's for Learners. And Ted's heard me say this a couple times, but we took that slogan from Virginia's for Lovers because we wanted to go beyond getting people to come visit Virginia to getting them to stay because of the great educational experience we have. So it's not about Virginia's for Lovers and coming to Waynesboro and seeing the amazing mountains. And we're like 2 weeks early, Pam. The leaves haven't changed yet. I was telling our friends from Texas.
I was expecting our friends here in the valley to deliver, but
Virginia's for Learners is about moving from visiting Waynesboro to getting folks to stay because of the innovation, the great education experience that we have. And it's about preparing our students to go deeper. It's about giving students the maximum opportunities after graduation. It's about changing our accreditation and our assessment system to open up the doors for innovation. And we're going to continue to do that. And the other challenge that I'll put on the table to you is, as we talk about this work, as we talk about focusing on deeper learning and not just testing, as we focus on giving kids these great experiences after school, as we focus on why we changed the accreditation system to open up a focus on growth and not labeling schools as failures when they're trying to fix themselves, we need your help to tell that story in your communities. We launched Virginia's for Learners because we found that our educators knew exactly what we did. Our newspapers, our businesses, our parents had no idea. And if we want to continue to build on this momentum of innovation and growth and the focuses that we've built in Virginia, we all have to be telling this story, or people aren't going to know what we did and why we did it. And so please, the other challenge I'll put on the table, besides innovating and thinking differently about our teachers, is join us in this, and we'll continue to fight with you on how we can invest in our teachers and our schools.
I think one area I'd love to just emphasize, near and dear to my heart. This past summer I met a couple of authors. I don't know if any of you follow Jim Fallows, longtime reporter. Anyway, Jim and his wife have been traveling all over the country, visiting towns that were in real risk of just being left behind, that have sort of revived. There's sort of a renaissance there. And I read their book, and then we've been spending a lot of time together because I went all over the country and talked about schools that were really engaging kids, having them learn important skills. And as I visit schools, I said, isn't it interesting that the more a school focuses on practical applied skills, the more schools let kids solve real problems in their community and get that kind of tangible feedback, the more they leave high school prepared to do something besides just fill in a college application. Isn't it interesting that those tend to be communities that are on the ascension? Well, Jim and Deb Fallows travel all over the country, purposely finding communities on the rise, and they, in their book, kind of as an aside, say, and one of the characteristics of these communities is really innovative high schools, oftentimes complemented by really hands-on pragmatic community colleges, but high schools that value real skill development. And as we've been percolating on this, we sort of realize the following, and this is provocative, but I think it's worth saying, is that if your school system, so if you're Northern Virginia, and Amazon, locates there, there's no shortage of jobs in Northern Virginia. But for a lot of the groups here, you don't want your kids feeling they've got to leave their community to go to Northern Virginia to get a job. And when I interview these kids, I think a lot of people presume that a kid we've been all over the state, but that a kid can't wait to get out of Community X just to get to Northern Virginia. Well, that's actually not the way most kids think of it. They want to stay in their community. That's where their friends are, their family are. If there aren't jobs there, they're sort of put in this tough situation. And so one of the points that's emerged here and gotten really clear is, if your focus is 100% college ready, then maybe 1, 2, 3% of your kids will get into a top college. They'll go off to who knows where. And maybe they never come back. And all the other kids who are doing a bunch of irrelevant college-ready stuff are sort of a bit left high and dry. If kids come out of high school with real skills, and these skills can take a whole range of things. They could be anywhere from master electrician skills to coding skills to who knows what. They're just a whole set of things that kids, if we gave them a little bit of space in middle and high school, could get really good at something that matters. David's here, but we spent a lot of time. I've gotten to know this great film team with an amazing educator in Fubana, but also really remarkable students. I don't know if they're in the room or not, but anyway, these are really impressive kids. And they're getting really good at creating films. Well, guess what? They have a career proficiency coming out of high school that most other kids would dream to have. And so the thing I'd emphasize here, this isn't just a small thing, is if you're in what is a school all about? It's a hub for a community. If you want to give your community real legs going forward, the more you're empowering all kids to get good at something that lets them create a great career path coming out of school, and then the mindset and the confidence that they can learn what's needed to learn and redirect and pivot, they'll stay in your community. Your community will be on the rise. But if you just say, hey, in our dream world, we'll get 1 kid out of our graduating class into an Ivy League school and 3 kids into UVA, keep our fingers crossed that they come back, and the rest were all told that they weren't very gifted because they couldn't do well on college-ready bullshit, you're screwing over your community and you're screwing over those kids. And so I really feel like that's something we need to stare right at the face of, because the fact is that most of what kids study in high school is not going to be used later in life. I listened to, James and I were talking, there's a podcast called Freakonomics, and they went, so Steve Levitt did this podcast, and that on Freakonomics' Twitter feed, they asked followers of Freakonomics how much of high school math you use later in life. And these are by and large really nerdy people that follow Freakonomics. The high number for a high school topic was 4% use it as adults. 4% was a high water mark. Like everything else was 1, 2, 3% or 0. And so if that's the part and parcel of what kids are studying in school, nobody's going to hire somebody. Nobody's going to revive a community because 3 kids come out of high school saying I can do a closed form integral with, using hyperbolic cosine substitutions. That doesn't revive a community. But kids that get really good at something that matters, kids that have a chance to pick across a broad array of really interesting, engaging things, kids that are doing projects where they develop those skills, gain real mastery, and create and implement something that makes their community better, they're going to be the kids that are great citizens. They're going to be the kids with a real sense of purpose, but they're also going to be the kids that make your community's future.
All right, I'm David Donnan. I'm a senior at Allegheny High School. So why I think the innovation work we're doing is important is because I think a lot of what we're doing is shifting paradigms from how things have been done to how we want things to be done. And the most interesting thing about that, I think, is we're all doing different things, right? We're not all innovating the same way. That wouldn't be innovation. So we're working on the different problems that we see, and we're taking a really individual approach in our districts. We're focusing on students and teachers and the individuals that make up the system instead of just the system. And so I think that's one of the really important things we're doing. One of the important things we need to keep doing is looking at the problems, because no school district is perfect, and we need to engage with those problems, recognize that they're real, and then work on fixing them and always improving.
I think that the work that you all are doing is very important, because if you look around, we live in a different society than you guys were raised in. We live in a society where when we go to school, we have to learn a code blue. We talk about school shootings as a normal. We talk about mental health as a normal. It shouldn't be a normal. They are real things that affect us every day. And you have to just talk to students. You can't just think that they all, in a classroom, I would say in my classrooms, only 50% of us actually get the work. The other 50%, either cheat or they just sit there and just let things happen to them. And then they have to deal with the outcomes. So if school was designed for every student and not just the students that are gonna get it, it would be better.
Remind us who you are and where you're from.
My name is Jill Shepard. I'm a senior at Urbana County High School. Yes.
Alright, my name's Kaya. I'm a senior and I go to Urbana. I don't exactly know how to answer this question, but I'm gonna try my best. So I guess I can base it off of me. I know that I struggle with teachers, giving out work, and then I'm supposed to know it the next day. So I feel like when I'm connected more with teachers and I have one-on-one time with teachers, I can understand the information better than just, being able to, throw it at me and then say I have to know it by tomorrow or a couple days from then. So I think this is really, really important that you guys care enough to, think about the kids behind us. I know you guys care about us, but it's important because I have a younger sister and I know, I wouldn't want her to struggle with the same things I did. So I think that's really important to me.
Hello everyone, I'm Sasha Federico. I am also a senior at Urbana County High School. And what they all said were amazing. It's definitely hits the spot. But I wanted to talk about how technology in today's day and age, in today's society, we have improved in technology, as we all know. We have our iPhones and our computers. We have technology at our fingertips. So why not take advantage of that? We recently were at Cumberland High School about 2 weeks ago, and it was really fascinating to see in the conference. They showed us film about how a program, it was called Mystery Skype, and schools around the states or in classrooms, these kids would Skype somewhere in like Ireland or somewhere in Europe or Africa, and it was amazing how they could learn and be hands-on about about just like where they're from, and they gave these locations and hints of where they're from, like, oh, you know, it's very grassy and it's hilly. You could tell by their accents what they look like. You kind of got an idea, and I thought that was really, really cool, just how they were taking advantage of what we have now. So maybe that could be a good way of like getting things hands-on. I think it would be different instead of kids just sitting there and reading from textbooks. I'm sorry, but textbooks, it doesn't click for us. So I think that would be definitely a better change. It really stinks because I feel bad for even the teachers, because they tell us that like sometimes we don't want to do this. We want to teach it our own way, but we know we have to because the state tells us we have to, and it really does. It does put a damper on us, because we feel for them. Like, we don't want to learn this either. We should focus on what makes us passionate and what makes us like strive for a career instead of academic. We should focus like testing on more electives, what we're actually going to use in life instead of just SOLs on academic classes. Let's put SOLs on electives we are definitely gonna use. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you all for that first piece. I want to ask you some questions as well. I visited Allegheny County High School, and if you get a chance, definitely visit. They're doing some incredible work in the project-based learning space. But it's the only school in the nation, and maybe the only place we know of in the world, that has a therapy chicken. So actually exists there, and it came out of a student project. And so, what was the chicken's name? Do you know?
I do know.
Okay, all right.
Jerry.
Yeah, Jerry. So one of the things you just talked about was that sometimes folks will say, well, we can't do anything different because the state tells us how we have to teach this. The truth of the matter is that the state does tell folks what they have to teach, but we actually don't tell you how, right? And so one of the questions that I have for you, and anyone can answer this, is how do you want to be taught, and what type of things that happen in your classroom really get you excited about learning?
I want to be taught where the same way you expect a child to know what they're learning, I want the teachers to know what's the reason for them to teach the information. Like, you'll use this in this part of the world. You'll use this and that. So, and the way you can do it is with hands-on learning most of the time. Just like learning about mountains and using clay, or like using the valley and just making it yourself. That's easier to learn for me than just looking at pictures and graphs and trying to formulate all the numbers and figure out what's talking about.
Yeah. Anyone else?
So I really understand that a lot of the work we're doing here is working on, being out of the box, but I am actually a huge proponent, at least for some people and for myself, of traditional learning. I love textbooks. I love reading all that old British literature stuff, like those math problems that only 4% of people remember. I love solving those, And so I think one of the most important things about innovation is not just changing everything, but making it work for everyone. I know equity was mentioned earlier, and I think that part of equity is not shifting everything to one way. It's so that everyone can get what they need.
David, I think you make a great point that the key, you like British literature, right? Others may have never seen a book that speaks about their own culture, for instance. And so I think the key is getting kids, if the goal is to build comprehension or reading skills or even cultural competence, it's finding something that interests every child, right? And the same is true with math. you like, my son is like you. He loves solving problems. He's a fourth grader learning long division. And it's like, it's opened up a whole new world. You mean that we can figure this stuff out with these formulas? But ultimately, even in math, it's about tapping into somebody's why. You love exploring, and you're probably going to be a kid that gets into calculus and wants to think about differential equations one day and get way deep into it. But there are other kids that, you know what they want to do? They want to know how that math is going to apply when they're doing an engineering problem or in a house and building and being able to solve, and that's what geometry is really about. So I'd love to hear more from others about how you want learning to look and how we could do this tailoring. How is it possible, or have you seen in your own classes where every child gets something that really taps into what they uniquely want? How can we do that for everybody?
I know it'd probably be like really costly, but I think, to focus on every child individually, like you said, get something that sparks their interest. Like it might be costly, but if it's worth it for the kids and for them to really understand the subject, then why should that be a problem? If it's going to be our future generation, this is what that's what we should worry about.
I think a lot of hands-on. Seriously, kids learn a lot hands-on. Here at Cumberland High School, there was this kid. He was doing like this welding VR type thing, and me and Jules asked him like, how is he so, into it? It seemed pretty boring, but he was like, how are you so into it? And he said, because my dad does it, and it just shocked me because it's like this kid is like in like 5th or 6th grade, and he wants to do something his dad is doing. So it was hands-on, and I learned hands-on. I think that's better for me. So.
Yeah, to piggyback off of what they're saying, so my dad is a carpenter, and when me and my sister were little, we used to always help him do different stuff around the house, build different things outside. We built like a shed together or whatever, and while we were doing it, he always made sure we learned the math in it. He always made us like do the angles, use the theorems and different stuff to calculate the percentages, and he was like, no, it has to be right, because if it's not right, it's not going to work. So just him drilling that into us, and then going into school and learning the same information that he previously taught us really gave me that's why I like math. I'm not really good at geometry, I'm better at algebra, but I like math because I like solving things. I like finding a problem and solving it, and that's part of what he taught me. But then there's students that like other things. I know in my English class, we have a 10-page paper due like in December. It's like our final project, whatever. But it's a research paper that we get to research anything about. So all the kids were like, oh, okay, that's fine, as long as I get to research what I want to talk about, as long as you want to hear my voice on this and get the research that I think is valid to put in here. And I think schools should be open more to that. What is your opinions on this? And saying their opinions and either saying that's a valid opinion based off of this information or that's invalid based off this information.
Yeah, I'm curious about a couple things. I bragged about you guys on the film initiative, but maybe talk a little bit about the impact of that on your view about learning and working collaboratively as a team on a project. But I also think it'd be interesting for you guys to share with this audience the effect on your peers, your friends, your classmates of the SOLs.
Okay, we'll talk about it. So, TV production. The class is, okay, so Sasha did not have it with us. Sasha took it with 10th grader. Me and Kaya were partners. The only girls. Yeah, we were partners. And we got to just be creative in anything we did. Mr. Small gave us a project. We were like, okay, we have to do this, but let's do do this just to be creative. Let's do this just to show like, this is us, this is what we're doing. And lots of times, there's some projects where we had to edit ourselves and use the same amount of materials to edit, but then there's others where we had to work together for a common picture of the way we're gonna have it at the end. And me and Kaya got closer from that. And also the guys in our classroom who were seniors, and we were just like, oh. I got closer with them. I talked to them a lot still. And it just really just brings everyone together, just laughing and hanging out in class, just getting to know each other. Mr. Small would come over and just be like, oh, this is how you do that. And then he'd just leave us alone and let us figure everything else out on our own, which really helped us just not depend on anybody else, just learn independency, I guess. And then seeing our classmates, it was our junior year, so seeing our classmates just struggle constantly in their other classes, it was hard, but the way I really don't know how some of them passed the SOLs, because I don't, because they would always come to school, head down, just completely like bashing anything that was going on. They hated every single minute being there. They're like, this is prison. The bells are going off. We have to go here. We have to do this. There's concrete everywhere. We're surrounded. This is prison. But then they passed. So yay for Fluvanna teachers, but it's just probably if I asked them a question that was on the SOL last year, they wanted me to answer.
Also, there was this project Mr. Small had us do. We had to pick like an animation film, and you had to take all the sound out. We had to put our own sound in. So, like for my voiceovers, I had Jules and a guy, and then I did Tinkerbell, so I had to make all the noise. So I had like a fan in there, and I had like a bee, and I just had to make all the sound over and over again. And when he gave us that project, I kid you not, the whole class sat there for 30 minutes, didn't know what to do. But we all kind of just like helped each other out, and we ended up finishing it. In that class, I mean, we all just got a lot closer just by, helping each other and making fun of each other's projects, just laughing. And then for an SOL, like Jules said, there can be kids that don't come to school and still pass the SOL, and there can be kids that attend school every day and still not pass the SOL. I think it depends on the kid and how they learn, and that's exactly why I think this is important, because you guys are getting that big step to make sure kids get the help they need.
Yeah.
We've got about 2 minutes, so why don't we, Sasha, and then let James and Ted, if you guys have one last thing to do, and then we'll wrap and be ready to move into the next piece. Thank you.
They had really good points, and yeah, SOLs, like for academic classes, they take a big toll on everybody. I know personally, I stress so much because I know this is based on am I gonna pass 11th grade? Am I gonna go on to graduate in 2020 where I want to graduate? So it takes a big toll. I know my parents are here, they'd say, oh yeah, she's stressing too much. And in the end, I know like I'm gonna be okay, but there's always just that worry because the SOLs are just such a big toll in our lives, and it's what teachers try to focus us on, and it shouldn't be like that. It takes a damper on you, and with electives you don't really have to worry about that. It's just more of an exam. You said Mr. Small's class, the TV production class, and I feel like I'm so free in there because it's what I want to do for a career. So, and I wish there was more testing on that because I know I'd fly right through those and I would not stress at all. But with academic, there's always just that fear, and it's very stressful.
Sure. I'll just close by, again, emphasizing my gratitude to the people in this room. And I think Pam is always great for out-of-the-box things, but I think hearing from students is so important because their voice is powerful. And I think what they express far better than I could ever express is these kids all have remarkable gifts. They have talents. And if we conceive of the idea of school being ranking kids on a very narrow slice of increasingly irrelevant skills, with a few being called gifted, and a bunch of other kids getting a message in some way, shape, or form they're average or below average, we're eroding their future prospect. I mean, we're letting them down. And I think what you heard from these kids, so as I say, I should just shut up and let them do the talking, but give them something they find interesting and challenging, have them work on something that is connected to their world and makes a contribution, have them work in ways that they can express and develop proficiencies that are distinctive and specific to that individual child. These kids are off to the races, and I think that's really the existential choice we face in education. Are we all about ranking kids on narrow sets of skills to meet the needs of some outside entity, or are we about helping kids develop their creative, distinctive potential? And as I say, every time I see these kids, I love getting the update because they just give all of us inspiration.
Yeah, thanks, Ted. I think I heard 3 big takeaways for me. One is that this continued focus on student choice, and that some kids like it how it is, right? I mean that's important to remember, is that innovation also means that those kids that have been really successful in what we're doing, we also want to continue to build opportunities for them to be successful as well. But the second thing I heard just is something I think about all the time, and that's family engagement. We talk all the time about how we can get families engaged in school. And the students here just gave us an incredible idea. What if one day, instead of 1 through 37 odd, and I know not many of us are doing 1 through 37 odd anymore. Y'all probably don't even know what that is, but back in the day in the textbooks, they would have like 40 problems on a page.
We did that in elementary school.
So, but the best part is the answers are in the back of the book. So.
Exactly. Back of the book is amazing.
We do the even. Yeah. So, anyways, but what if instead of that worksheet or 1 through 37 odd, we just ask students to go home and talk to their parents about how they use math in their daily lives, or what they're reading at work that gets them excited. I just had a lot of thoughts as I was sitting here thinking about how much more powerful it would be for students to enter the classroom the next day with the topic that they're working on. What if homework wasn't about actually doing the problems, but asking their parents how it's relevant? I mean, that's just really cool. And then I think the last major point around the SOLs, I'll just tell you a quick story. My son's in 4th grade, so he took his first SOLs since I've seen you last. I feel like I'm a super engaged parent. We eat dinner around the table every day. We talk about school. And last year, sometime in May, I'm sitting around the table and I asked my kids what they were doing that day. And my son said he took the SOL test. And I immediately, I said, "Do you mean the SOL, the Standards of Learning Test?" He goes, "Well, Dad, I thought it was going to be a test about the sun." He took Spanish in school. And he said, "I thought it was going to be a test about the sun, but it was a super boring test about reading." And so I said, "Well, how do you think you did?" He goes, "Well, I don't know. I just did my best." Right? And so, immediately I'm like, I can't believe we didn't have the big dinner and the breakfast in the morning and all the things. Did I buy peppermints? So. But what was really cool about that experience, and this is, I was hearing the stresses. He didn't stress it at all because I didn't put any of that stress on him, right? Or the teachers, right? So that stress is coming from us is more the point. And so I think that whereas I may never get the ability in 2 generations to eliminate any assessments, I don't think that's necessarily going to happen, at least in our time. We do have a lot of control over how kids react to these and how they feel about them. And we can change them to be more relevant as well. And so those are my big takeaways, and I really appreciate you guys sharing with us today.
Thank you.